later, drying up for the Western Isles. Otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK. That cloud bringing in some spots of rain and drizzle over western hills of England and Wales. But some brighter interludes towards the east, where it will be very mild. 13 to 14 Celsius generally, but 16 possible. Northeast England, eastern Scotland, even 17. Small chance of that in eastern Scotland. But it's a windy day as well for northern parts of the UK. That wind increasing over northern hills and especially the Northern Isles on Thursday night into the start of Friday. 60-mile-per-hour gusts for a time in the far north. Stays damp in the north of Scotland, stays cloudy generally elsewhere, and with that breeze, with the cloud, it is a very mild start to Friday with temperatures around 12 or even 13 Celsius in some of the warmer spots. So we start off with that cloud cover, but actually for many places it's looking a little brighter. So for the Midlands, for eastern England, eastern Scotland, a chance of some sunshine coming through, even for northwest England. But generally it's a similar sort of day with that keen gusty wind, the outbreaks of rain for northern Scotland, some light rain and drizzle for western hills and coasts as well, with that thick cloud always coming in on that westerly breeze from the Atlantic. Now, this weather front in the far north will eventually sink south over the weekend. That will introduce brighter skies from the north, but it will also turn the temperatures down a few degrees. So we're looking at those temperatures returning to average by Monday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday. You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome once again to On the Money, your daily weekday dose of economics, business and consumer news. I'm Liam Halligan, and for the next hour we'll be talking about the government's controversial decision to scrap the eastern leg of HS2 between the East Midlands and Leeds. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Simon Pusey.
Thank you, Liam. This is your news at 1 o'clock. The Transport Secretary has announced his integrated rail plan, which sees £96 billion of investment in the Midlands and the North. He confirmed the HS2 Manchester to Leeds line is set to be scrapped. Shadow Transport Secretary Jim McMahon described it as a betrayal of trust, but Mr Shapps insists it will deliver faster rail services sooner.
It's an ambitious and unparalleled programme that not only overhauls the intercity links across the North and Midlands, but it also speeds up the benefits for local areas and serves destinations people most want to reach.
Boris Johnson was elected on a promise to level the playing field, to make things better for households across the country. We were promised a Northern Powerhouse. We were promised a Midlands engine to be levelled up. But what we've been given today is a great train robbery.
A public inquiry will be held following the death of Dawn Sturges, who was unwittingly poisoned by Novichok in 2018. Home Secretary Priti Patel has granted permission to convert the inquest into a public inquiry to better examine any possible Russian involvement. Ms Sturges died after the substance was used in an attempt to poison the former Russian spy, Sergei Skripal. A man who killed a university worker and seriously injured 7 others in a knife attack has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Zephaniah McLeod will initially serve his sentence at a high-security hospital. He carried out a spate of knife attacks in Birmingham city centre in September of last year. The Women's Tennis Association has cast doubt on the veracity of a letter which has been attributed to a missing Chinese tennis player. Peng Shuai hasn't been seen since she accused a senior Chinese government official of sexual assault. Chinese state media have published a letter in which she purportedly says, "I am not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home and everything is fine." Alec Baldwin is facing a second lawsuit over the fatal shooting on the film set Rust. Crew member Mamie Mitchell claims the script never called for a gun to be fired during the scene where cinematographer Helena Hutchins was shot and killed. She's called the incident a tragedy that has left her feeling depressed and unsafe.
I'll never forget what happened on the set of Rust that day. I relived the shooting and the sound of the explosion from the gun over and over again. I'm depressed. I don't feel safe. I feel like at any moment anything could happen to me. This violent tragedy has taken away the joy in my life.
The first ever long-acting injection to treat HIV has been approved by the NHS. It's estimated 13,000 people in England living with the virus will be offered the jab. Charities have hailed the news as incredible, as adults will no longer need to take daily tablets but will have 2 injections every 2 months. And the Prince of Wales and Duchess of Cornwall have travelled to Egypt for the second leg of their Middle East tour. Charles and Camilla spent the past 2 days touring Jordan, where the Prince praised the country's relationship with the UK in a speech marking the 100th anniversary of the founding of the nation. In Egypt, the visit will include a reception overlooking the pyramids in Giza to celebrate the bond between the two countries and a tour of the ancient city of Alexandria. And you are right up to date. I'll bring you the latest headlines in around half an hour. Now let's return to On the Money with Liam.
And this is On the Money. The government's announced the eastern leg of HS2 between a new East Midlands Parkway interchange and Leeds will be scrapped. This is a major revision to the government's original plans for the high-speed super train, as On the Money predicted on Monday. What's more, ministers also confirmed this morning that Northern Powerhouse Rail, the west to east high-speed link, meant to connect Liverpool to Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Hull and ultimately Newcastle, has also hit the buffers. So it's now clear long-awaited improvements to rail services from Birmingham to Leeds and from Manchester to Leeds and Sheffield will now consist of upgrades to existing lines rather than a new high-speed service. Unveiling the government's integrated rail plan in the Commons this morning, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps said it comprised £96 billion of investment in the Midlands and the North, calling it one of the biggest single acts of levelling up of any government in history.
It's an ambitious and unparalleled programme that not only overhauls the intercity links across the North and Midlands, but it also speeds up the benefits for local areas and serves destinations people most want to reach.
Shapps was keen to stress this investment package amounts to 5 times more than Crossrail, the new London train line across London, and 10 times more than was spent on the London Olympics. Upgrading lines between the East Midlands, Manchester and Leeds, as opposed to waiting for new high-speed links to be built, will lead to quicker improvements in journey time, Shapps argued. A train trip from Birmingham to Nottingham will be cut from an hour and a quarter to 26 minutes, he said. York to Manchester will take 55 rather than 83 minutes. And Bradford to Leeds will be a 12-minute trip, Shapps argued, around half the current journey time. Labour, though, and countless local newspapers across the Midlands and North view this new diluted package as a betrayal of trust.
Boris Johnson was elected on a promise to level the playing fields, to make things better for households across the country. We were promised a Northern Powerhouse. We were promised a Midlands engine to be levelled up. But what we've been given today is a great train robbery.
The government claims its new integrated rail plan is a win-win. But there's a backlash not just from Labour but also red wall Tory MPs, those representing the very seats upon which the government's 80-seat majority depends. HS2 is still Europe's largest infrastructure project. But with the original £30 billion price tag having spiralled upward to over £100 billion, cost issues are clearly a concern. But be in no doubt, by going ahead with HS2 linking London, Birmingham and then Manchester with a 250-mile-an-hour bullet train while denying the same service to Leeds and across northern England as a whole, the Tories are taking a major political risk. And that's our on-the-money question today. Given this HS2 cutback, is levelling up now dead? Our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin is, of course, all over this story. He's in Leeds and he's with Henry Murison, well known to viewers of On the Money. Henry is director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Kevin, what's the reaction to this announcement? We're not surprised, but we might still be shocked.
Absolutely. The word betrayal features very largely on the lips of Northern leaders this afternoon, although I did speak to one man in the station who works in the rail industry, and he said he was glad the HS2 link was scrapped because it was a waste of money, but he says we need the money for other transport links as well. And as you say, I'm joined by Henry Murison from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. Henry, Liam's asking the question, is levelling up dead? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it puts it on life support, Liam, and the challenge is, as we've talked before on your programme, and you covered this issue so assiduously in the last few weeks, this is a critical test for Boris Johnson. He made personal commitments as recently as yesterday about the line across the Pennines, and it may need a geography lesson or a lesson in getting the Treasury to pay up when it needs to, but Marsden is not across the Pennines. Leeds is across the Pennines, and Warrington to Marsden, as much as we welcome HS2 to Manchester and Manchester Airport on the western leg, the cuts to the Leamside line in the northeast, not opening up stations that will unlock connectivity between Middlesbrough and Newcastle, failing to electrify the line to Hull, which is a core part of the Northern Powerhouse rail network, a scheme that could have been delivered quickly, and apparently this was about quick schemes. That was the quickest scheme available to the government. And most importantly, I suppose, sitting here in Leeds, it is a really terrible outcome that rather than HS2 being a phased project on the eastern leg, that first phase being Clayton to Leeds, along with the electrification of the conventional line to Sheffield, along with that new line through Bradford. So where we're standing right now, Leeds Station would have been transformed, been rebuilt by HS2, been ready for MPR, and what we're going to get isn't full fat, as Tracy Braben has said, but it's semi-skimmed. And in particular for Bradford, I don't think it's even semi-skimmed. There's no new station in Bradford, and what I would say about it is that the whole regeneration of the city centre was based around securing a new station. Even if there hadn't been a new line to Manchester, ruling out a new station is, I believe, a really poor outcome. And it shows that for the city in the north and the towns in the north around it, like Shipley, Keighley, classic towns, and we heard earlier from Robbie Moore, I hope he'll pop up with Kevin or others around the station later in Parliament why that's so terrible for the Bradford district, terrible for Keighley, where I live, and Robbie's my local MP, and I'm really, really concerned that in the heart of West Yorkshire, the towns where I think even the Prime Minister employs a transport advisor who was born in Keighley, and I feel like we have been let down. We have been sold down the river by certain individuals who have led the Prime Minister against his instincts and against his own promises, Liam. And I think it is a disgrace that has been allowed to happen. And the Treasury and some in Number 10 have got a lot of questions about why they've taken a boosterish Prime Minister and turned him into someone who can't keep his promises.
And Henry, I guess to play devil's advocate, what we heard from Grant Shapps is this delivers the improvements faster, which when you speak to people, they say they just want these improvements done. They don't want to wait until the 2040s for them to happen. And also that it maybe focuses more on the towns. You know, we heard about places like Wakefield, Dewsbury, Huddersfield, Doncaster, that actually maybe this moves the benefits around and doesn't just focus on the big cities of Leeds and Manchester.
I'm a great fan of Grant Shapps, and I think he has been a voice of reason in this debate, but I have to disagree with him on that analysis. When you look at the failure to build a new line between Leeds, Bradford and Manchester, what that will do is force all those fast trains they're trying to get across the Pennines through the corridor between Huddersfield and the great city here of Leeds. The problem with that is that if you live in Mirfield or Dewsbury or Batley, for example, or even down in the People's Republic of Morley, which may be a place that perhaps some of your viewers are not as familiar with as Kevin and I, but those towns are core red wall towns. A number of them have Conservative MPs, and the reality of these plans is that in order to get those fast trains to Manchester, 6 trains an hour, there won't be many stopping trains left on that route. There certainly won't be any freight from the great city of Hull or the great city of Liverpool transferring across the Pennines, getting those trucks off the road. So this is genuinely a project in Northern Powerhouse Rail that really doesn't really befit the name any longer, Liam. And my concern would be around quick wins. The Prime Minister wants a review of how to get HS2 trains to Leeds. We've been planning this project for 10 years. We don't need another review. We need to get on with electrifying the line between here and Sheffield. That's something that needs to be done anyway, even if there'd never been an HS2. And I think that he should think again about the phasing of the Eastern Leg. I think the government secretly might be trying to save the Eastern Leg, even against the Treasury, and that perhaps this project is being presented in such a way that it looks like it's been cut, so it can be restored later on. I may be wrong, Liam, but what I think is building that leg from Clayton to Leeds, which would have unlocked Northern Powerhouse Rail to Sheffield, a much better project to get going with, and it is one that was in the HS2 business case. It's already been costed up. It could have been delivered very quickly.
And Henry, one final question. You said Boris Johnson is boosterish about this. You said that Grant Shapps seems to be a voice of reason. You haven't out and out said it. Are you blaming the Treasury? Because obviously Rishi Sunak is a Yorkshire MP, the Chancellor. Are you blaming Rishi Sunak for this downgrade?
I think the government has to take collective responsibility for what's happened, but I think that I don't think it's any secret that Treasury officials never liked HS2, never liked Northern Powerhouse Rail, and so they might be moving them to Darlington, but I'm pretty sure that they aren't necessarily got the interest of Darlington at heart. You won't be able to get HS2 to Darlington, and with no Leamside line, I don't think you'll be able to get many Northern Powerhouse Rail services there either. So if you're at the Treasury, I hope you don't want to go to Manchester, I hope you don't want to come to here in Leeds, because you're going to really struggle to get a train, Liam.
Excellent. Henry Murison from the Northern Powerhouse Partnership, thank you very much. Back to you in London, Liam.
Thank you, Kevin. Kevin Larkin there, our Yorkshire and Humber reporter, and Henry Murison, Director of the Northern Powerhouse Partnership. He knows a bit about HS2. He spent a big chunk of his adult life campaigning for it, and some of that passion coming out in that excellent interview. We'll continue the discussion with HS2 cutbacks is levelling up now dead later in the show with a whole host of experts. So stay tuned for that. We'll have the Tory MP for Thurscombe Moulton, Kevin Hollinrake, Mark Littlewood, the Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and Gerald Jennings, the Director of the West and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce, as ever here on The Money. In-depth discussions with people who really know their stuff. Talking of which, for today's Money Talks, I sat down with Richard Bartlett, the UK and Ireland manager of Clear Now. This is a global company specialising in logistics and customs clearance. It's a fascinating interview with Richard giving me a genuine insider's account of how the operation of UK supply chains and ports, crucial to our economy, crucial to keeping inflation down, has been impacted by both Brexit and lockdown. That's after the break. So stay with us here on GB News. You're on The Money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. Much colder weather is likely later next week, but for the time being, it's very mild across the UK during the next few days with a lot of cloud cover and rain at times. A keen westerly airflow that's bringing in the cloud and some rain from the Atlantic. A lot of mild air as well, but the most persistent wet weather likely associated with these weather fronts close to the north of Scotland. So for Orkney, for parts of northern mainland Scotland, it is a damp afternoon to come. The rain easing a little later, drying up for the Western Isles. Otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK. That cloud bringing in some spots of rain and drizzle for western hills of England and Wales, but some brighter interludes towards the east where it will be very mild. 13 to 14 Celsius generally, but 16 possible northeast England, eastern Scotland, even 17. Small chance of that in eastern Scotland. But it's a windy day as well for northern parts of the UK. That wind increasing over northern hills and especially the Northern Isles on Thursday night into the start of Friday. 60-mile-per-hour gusts for a time in the far north. Stays damp in the north of Scotland, stays cloudy generally elsewhere, and with that breeze, with the cloud, it is a very mild start to Friday with temperatures around 12 or even 13 Celsius in some of the warmer spots. So we start off with that cloud cover, but actually for many places it's looking a little brighter. So for the Midlands, for eastern England, eastern Scotland, a chance of some sunshine coming through, even for northwest England. But generally it's a similar sort of day with that keen gusty wind. The outbreaks of rain for northern Scotland, some light rain and drizzle for western hills and coasts as well, with that thick cloud always coming in on that westerly breeze from the Atlantic. Now, this weather front in the far north will eventually sink south over the weekend. That will introduce brighter skies from the north, but it will also turn the temperatures down a few degrees. So we're looking at those temperatures returning to average by Monday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. Now, we'll be continuing our coverage of the government's newly announced integrated rail plan, asking the question, with HS2 being cut back, is levelling up now dead? But before that discussion continues, it's time for my daily interview series. Here it is. It's Money Talks. Now, for months, economists have been highlighting supply chain snarl-ups, that is, wrinkles in production processes, including the movement of components and goods within and between countries. As the global economy struggles to reboot after lockdown, such supply chain issues are a major cause of inflation, as they push up prices for producers, which then get passed on, and they also slow down economic growth. Here at On the Money, we felt it was worth digging into the UK's supply chain realities. So who better to learn from than Richard Bartlett? He's appeared on the show before as a panellist. He's the UK and Ireland manager of ClearNow, a company specialising in logistics and customs clearance. So here's our latest Money Talks interview, and I started by asking supply chain guru Richard Bartlett how he ended up in the logistics business.
Quite bizarrely, actually, I had 16 years of running my own logistics company, specialising in Europe and worldwide. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, I was involved with the Institute of Exports on their Brexit, working, helping many businesses, institutes, how to understand how Brexit was going to affect them on documentation, customs. And really I've been doing workshops, probably workshops every day for the last 3.5 years. Worked in Ireland, on the north and the south, in Newry and Dublin, worked for Irish Customs, HMRC. And then I've been brought into ClearNow on the supply chain to see a digitalised world. We're going into more digitalised under the WTO, the World Trade Organization, which is the fundamental of trade around the world, based in Switzerland. And really our principle at ClearNow is to make the solution and make everything a lot smoother. So when goods come in, people have real time, they can sort things out. It has sustainability because obviously everything's digital. And we see ourselves as the Uber, as working with logistics companies, clearing goods, getting it to the end consumer, which is the most important thing.
When you've appeared on the Money Show, when we've had discussions about supply chains, I've often described you as somebody who's really at the coalface of this supply chain issue, and we need to talk about that. But first I want to talk about Brexit, because in the years running up to Brexit, after the referendum, before we actually went into the transition period and then left 3 or 4 years later, you have been really heavily involved in devising those systems. So in a nutshell, before we drill down, how is it going for the UK in terms of the efficacy of our customs, imports and exports procedures in a post-Brexit world? Is it getting smoother?
There's two ends to this, and this is what people have to understand. The UK on importing, so goods coming into the UK, is actually still in a transition period. So that's not changed. So goods are allowed to arrive into the UK with limited documentation and customs clearance, we call a simplified. For exporters, unfortunately, they were sold down the river on the first day of January. They was moving goods into Europe. Many issues at ports, at countries. Each of the 27 member states created their own customs procedure, which created a lot of confusion to a lot of businesses. Health certificates were required for just normal goods leaving the UK. And for exports, it's been a huge challenge. Anybody in parcels, anything that delivering into Europe, it's been probably a disaster for them. People dealing with Amazon. Amazon moved the production into Europe. They refused to help businesses and made the businesses in the UK have a subsidiary in Europe. That's caused major problems for the supply chain into Amazon, because now anybody exporting, anybody servicing Europe in anywhere within the European community, all the goods have to go into Amazon. That's created major problems for a lot of businesses in the UK.
Do you think the EU's made it particularly difficult for the UK? And if so, can you expand on that?
I think the EU have just played by the book. I think the deal that we created, it's a deal there. I think what the EU have done, they've kept to the procedure. I don't think they've made it particularly easy. But we're certainly now starting to see businesses within UK starting to get used to it. I've done lengths and lengths of training on documentation, on customs, because you've got to remember the UK has always been part of a 28 member state. So when you're moving goods, for anybody today, you would move goods as if you was moving it from London to Manchester.
Yeah.
That suddenly changed overnight for a lot of business, and all of a sudden, to move goods, they've had to have the commodity codes, the Incoterms, all these critical areas that have huge effects on a British business. And that's been a huge challenge. Some have done it very well, and some have had huge challenges on the exports. On the imports, what's happened on the imports is the tsunami is waiting to happen. And I think the UK government are fully aware of that. They know there's a major problem coming when health certificates are announced or released. Now they've been delayed and delayed. That'll be on the 1st of July. But actually on the 1st of January, we'll now enter a customs world where goods entering the UK will have to be on a full customs declaration. That's a huge challenge for many businesses in the UK.
Isn't it up to the British government, though, how it manages that challenge? Because that's the end of the operation that we're in charge of. They could keep it relatively easy if they wanted to, couldn't they?
I think they will, Liam, to be honest. I think the for the faults, or however we describe it, I think the UK government have helped importers. They've helped people sustain or try and sustain the level of business that's imports coming in. Not sure on the exports, but unfortunately they don't have that control.
Yeah.
They can control what's coming in. They've been very good on some of the third country duties, if anybody's understand when you bring goods in. If you've not got the origin of the products, that then creates a dutiable rate. So a customer then has to pay, a business has to pay a duty. That's passed on to the consumer. So they've tried to reduce a lot of that to make the impact on businesses, on your supermarkets, from your supermarkets to normal business, toy industry. They've tried to keep that at a minimum. So they've done a lot of good things on that. But on the exports, that's been a huge challenge for a lot of exporters. And we have this divide. On one hand, Boris obviously wants us to be an exporting global trade. They've done some terrific deals around the world. But actually, there's a lot of exporters who have no idea how to export. Santander recently on the barometer, 70% of businesses don't export because of bureaucracy, because borders, they don't know how the challenges affects their business, so they stop exporting them because it's too much of a challenge for them, which is...
So that's a survey by a major bank, Santander, as you say, and you think there's a lot of pent-up exports potential that isn't happening because of the bureaucracy. That's not a post-Brexit thing, is it? That's been there for a while.
No, but I think what you've got to understand, Liam, is that when we move goods into Europe, it was quite straightforward because we had the accumulation agreement. So if we move goods into Europe or we imported some goods, we put it together, we exported it out, it was an origin of an EU. So we had a lot of benefits when we were trading around the world. The UK now stands alone. The origin plays a critical role for a lot of businesses because your origin is your UK origin. With trade deals are fantastic around the world, but unless you have the origin of the product, there's no, the advantage isn't as great as somebody who's working under a third country where he's having to pay duties. He's got lots of other documentation, lots of other issues with duty, and the Incoterm plays a key role in that. And we're trying to advise British businesses to really think about the Incoterms in this supply chain area. It's it's like a circus. The supply chain is like a circus. Everybody's taking no responsibility. I think British businesses need to take responsibility and actually understand what is best for them to bring goods into the UK, to service the customers, and then how to import it, understand the documentation, and then to export it back out. If we get that right, I think we'll be okay.
We are seeing now aerial photos of major ports like Felixstowe showing them snarled up and not enough containers and not enough HGV drivers to move the containers round. We're seeing importers into Britain diverting container ships to the European continent and putting their goods on trucks there and getting them into Britain a different way rather than going through our ports. To what extent are the issues at our ports that have developed over this summer, to what extent are they a Brexit phenomenon, so unique to the UK, and to what extent, Richard, are they a global phenomenon?
I think they're more global, Liam. I think we can't blame this on UK government. I think this is a global issue. I think we are so reliant on China and Asian markets to bring goods in, and the Asian market with COVID and the issues. Just to give
you a lot of closed factories.
Absolutely, they rely. China worked on zero COVID, so when there was any issues within a port would be closed down. We had Shenzhen closed this year for over 26 days. That's a huge effect because it's the backlog. Goods are not then coming out, and what's happening then is goods are being stuck at Felixstowe, obviously because we've got a supply chain problem. And then the goods, obviously, as the containers come in, because certain containers can only come into Felixstowe, and that's a big issue because then they can't release the goods because there's no space. So they move into Rotterdam, as we say, release the goods there. That, people have to understand, that is a cost to British businesses, who ultimately then pass it on to the consumer. And that's one of the biggest worries, and I think this is where the UK government need to tackle this. They need to look at it. We need an infrastructure. There's no doubt that British market is a very For a lot of countries around the world, they want to deal with the UK. There's no doubt about that. But if we don't have the infrastructure, this is going to fail. So, I mean, it's very important for the UK government to address this. It's a long-term, this is a long-term strategy, it's not short-term. They need to speak to the ports and get a system in place.
And that was the UK and Ireland manager of Clear Now, Richard Bartlett. And you can listen to the full-strength 20-minute version of that interview with Richard on my Money Talks podcast, on the GB News YouTube channel or via the GB News app. And that Money Talks podcast includes many other in-depth interviews with advertising guru Martin Sorrell, with former Treasury Minister Michael Portillo, Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, and many, many others. So, dear viewers, why not give it a whirl? Stay right there. We'll be continuing our debate about the government's decision to scrap the eastern leg of HS2 between Birmingham and Leeds. I'll be joined by my panel of expert economists. But first, it's the GB News headlines with Simon Pusey.
Thank you, Liam. I am Simon Pusey. Here are the latest headlines. Sir Keir Starmer has accused Boris Johnson of having let down everybody in the north by scrapping the HS2 extension to Leeds and scaling down Northern Powerhouse rail. The Transport Secretary announced £96 billion of investment in his integrated rail plan today. During his visit to a network rail hub in North Yorkshire, the Prime Minister said it was total rubbish that he was breaking his promises. He said the new plans will double capacity between Manchester and Leeds and treble capacity between Liverpool and Manchester. The Home Secretary Priti Patel has announced that a public inquiry will be held following the death of Dawn Sturgis, who was poisoned by Novichok in Wiltshire in 2018. She died after the substance was used in an attempt to poison the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal, a man who killed a university worker and seriously injured 7 others in a knife attack, has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Zephaniah McLeod will initially serve his sentence at a high-security hospital. His stab attack occurred in Birmingham city centre in September last year. The Women's Tennis Association says it's even more concerned about a missing Chinese player following the publication of a letter said to be from her. Peng Shuai hasn't been seen since she accused a senior Chinese government official of sexual assault. In a letter published by Chinese state media, she purportedly says, "I'm not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home and everything is fine." The first ever long-acting injection to treat HIV has been approved by the NHS. It's estimated 13,000 people in England living with the virus will be offered the jab. Charities have hailed the news as incredible, as adults will no longer need to take daily tablets, but will have 2 injections every 2 months. Well, that's it from me for now. I'll have more of all today's main stories at the top of the hour.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilized conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Welcome back. You're on the money. Today we're asking if levelling up is dead after the government announced earlier that the eastern leg of HS2 between a new East Midlands Parkway interchange and Leeds will be scrapped. Plus, Northern Powerhouse Rail that's meant to be linking west to east across the north of England, Liverpool, Manchester, Leeds, Sheffield, Hull, Newcastle. That also won't go ahead as previously advertised. It will be upgrades to existing lines rather than a new high-speed cross-country link. Joining me to talk about this is Mark Littlewood, Director General of the Institute of Economic Affairs, and I'm joined in the studio by a friend of the show, Max King, who writes an excellent column in Money Week. Max, we're not trained specialists, but you cover finance and you watch politics very closely. What do you make of this move by the government?
Well, I've always thought that HS2 was a ruinously expensive vanity project. And the sad thing is that governments tend to prefer vanity projects over lower-grade improvement projects, which achieve far more for people and cost a lot less. And the mystery has been why the HS2 wasn't scrapped years ago. And belatedly, it seems the government is redirecting the money, some of the money from HS2 into improving local rail in the north. And that means maybe not building HS2 out to Leeds, but upgrading the links from Morley, Keighley and Bradford into Leeds, which is much more important and will achieve much more for local people than helping politicians and football fans travel at speed from London to Manchester and back again.
For two southerners, we both spend quite a lot of time in the North England and know it reasonably well. It's true to say, isn't it, there is some low-hanging fruit. Vast swathes of the rail network across the north of England are still diesel trains rather than electric trains, which means that they're much slower, much more infrequent and often much more overcrowded.
Well, I haven't been on it for some time, but I very much remember that wonderful railway line which chugs from, is it Liverpool to Manchester, then across the Pennines to York, and it's diesel-powered and it stops at every station. It takes an ages. And you think, why can't they have a proper railway line here? Why can't they just upgrade this line? And perhaps at last the government is realising that. And they're, of course, getting brickbats. They're getting brickbats from people who say, well, why aren't you doing more? Well, you know, it's a good question. Why didn't they do more right at the start? But at least it's a step in the right direction. And I don't think anyone's going to miss reducing the HS2 up to Leeds.
Mark Littlewood, what do you make of this decision by the government? I know you've been pretty sceptical about HS2. Do you think it's worth taking the political blows to scale it back?
Yes, I'm not sure there will be too many political blows, Liam. I rather agree with what we've just heard from Max there. I mean, if HS2 helps levelling up at all, it's a colossally expensive way of levelling up. I think if you were to look at the projected number of jobs it was going to create, I think something in the region of 27,000, well, that sounds fantastic if you believe those numbers. But even if you were to believe those numbers, I think that comes in at £2, 3 or £4 million per job created. I mean, we can create jobs considerably cheaper than that. So I very much agree with Max. I think that if the government is going to spend money on transport, it's actually the rather less sexy, smaller schemes that usually have the most benefit. And I think we should also take our eyes off rail occasionally. I think the road network in the UK needs a pretty severe upgrade. Of course, roads still transport many more people and much more freight than rail could ever dream of. So I'd like us to get off the hook of believing that some sort of high-speed rail route, or indeed any rail route, is necessarily the best or the most sensible or the cheapest way of trying to bring economic growth to the north, or indeed any other part of the country.
Well, there is talk of a backlash among so-called Red Wall Tory MPs. Let's join Kevin Hollinrake now, who is the Conservative MP for Thirsk and Moulton up there in Yorkshire. Kevin, what do you make of this announcement? It's not a surprise. We could see it coming. But how's it going down across the Tory backbenches, MPs that represent your part of the country?
Well, there's some good stuff in it. 100 billion quid's good, and the fact that they're upgrading existing lines rather than new lines means it'll happen more quickly. But the worry I have and the concerns I have, particularly around things like Bradford, we thought Northern Powerhouse Rail, and kind of that was how it was mooted, was going to be a completely new line going straight from Leeds to Bradford to Manchester, which would have made a brand new station in Bradford, which has been fantastic for regeneration in the way we see regeneration at King's Cross, for example, and a 20-minute journey between Bradford and Manchester rather than the current one that takes about an hour. So there's some problems here that are not going to be solved by this solution, which are disappointing. Also, some of the journeys like York to Birmingham, for example, which were going to be under an hour, are still going to be around 2 hours. So there's some good news, but there's some disappointments.
Could there be a backlash here? Kevin, you're a very experienced parliamentarian, if I may say so. You read the political runes. Is this a political risk by the government? Are those Labour blows landing when they say this is a betrayal of the North?
I don't think it's going to be dozens of MPs that are going to have real problems with this. I think there will be some Conservative MPs that are not going to be happy. But as I say, there are some good things in here as well. I think the one thing I would say about this, I do see it as a missed economic opportunity. The scale of the challenge of levelling up is massive. You know, the economic disparity in per capita terms, relatively between the North East and London and the South East, is as large as it was between East and West Germany prior to reunification. That took 30 years and $2 trillion to narrow that gap. So we've got to think in that scale. This is about saving £4 billion here, I think, in terms of Northern Powerhouse Rail. And I think that's a false economy. I think it would have been great to have that agglomeration effect of Bradford properly connected to Leeds and Manchester. That would have been a big opportunity. It's an opportunity missed in these proposals. I hope we can find new ways to do the same thing.
Let me put this to you, Max King. I read my Yorkshire Post religiously. It's interesting that the original plan, HS2 2B as it's called, from Birmingham to Leeds, it goes through Rother Valley, Ashfield, Bolsover, North East Derbyshire, Penistone and Stocksbridge. These are all 2019 Tory gains, but it doesn't actually stop in any of those constituencies, so it is just upheaval. And the Yorkshire Post's Caitlin Doherty, she said, she tweeted, a proportion of Red Wall voters may be pretty chuffed to hear about the eastern leg of HS2 not going ahead for that reason.
Well, I think it's a very good point. And by the way, Bradford's already got 2 stations. I don't think it needs a third. Manchester's got 2 stations. It doesn't need a third. So I think this idea of a new line, which would have been extremely expensive, doesn't make any sense. But certainly upgrading the existing lines and letting the trains stop in between the big cities is very important. So there are some good points. More could have been done, but this is a good start.
Mark, let's return to you. Do you think this decision will be seen to be, when we look back, will be seen as the right decision if indeed it does lead to quicker gains, earlier reductions in journey times? After all, an election isn't, years and years away, and the government does have to demonstrate there is some return on this levelling up agenda.
I think that's absolutely right, Liam. And as we heard from Kevin, it may well be that there are some improvements here which come on stream a lot earlier than HS2. Even if you're the biggest fan of HS2, it wouldn't have been on stream for the next election if the Conservatives were thinking it might do them any benefits there at all. So as I say, these smaller, rather less glamorous projects actually tend to be of more benefit to the economy than these extraordinary grand projets, which run colossally over budget. I think the HS2 budget now is about twice what it started out to be. It's overrun by tens of billions. And I'm rather sceptical that we should just embrace this assumption that it would be bound to be good for the north of England. I mean, if you were to look at the experience of HS1, not particularly obvious that that's been fantastic for Kent. I mean, there's all sorts of factors involved, but it certainly hasn't supercharged the Kent economy. Why would we assume that HS2 would supercharge the northern economy? Or if you were to look at a town like Doncaster, I think it's about 100 minutes on train to get from Doncaster to London. It doesn't seem to have done a great deal to supercharge the Doncaster economy. So again, I think the practical thing to do, and quite possibly even the popular thing to do is to look at a whole series of micro projects, road improvements, minor rail improvements, and the rest. Doesn't grab the headline, doesn't have the lovely graphics that you've just shown, Liam, from the sort of HS2 promotional material, but almost certainly does a lot more to get the economy moving.
Kevin Hollinrake, do you buy that, what you just heard from Mark Littlewood, and do you buy my point that maybe there's some electoral savvy going on here? So upgrades, rather than building a new high-speed link in certain parts of the country, will bring quicker, earlier, tangible returns for those red wall voters?
Well, I agree with Mark's point, and I have mentioned that in the House a number of times. His point about Doncaster being well connected but not prosperous. It is not just infrastructure investment. You need skills, you need private sector investment as well to come alongside it. But I think things like the Bradford to Manchester link is not some grand projet. This is a really important improvement of a very slow, clunky, chugging link of 50-odd minutes, over an hour at times, to get from Bradford to Manchester. Bradford's the youngest city in the country. It's a key city in the north. If you really want that agglomeration effect right across the north, then you need to connect these cities together more effectively. That's what that was doing. It was a relatively modest cost. It's not about HS2. This is Northern Powerhouse Rail. That's the biggest disappointment I see in these proposals today.
Well, Kevin Hollinrake, Tory MP up there in Yorkshire, we thank you for your contribution. Max, a question I wanted to ask you. You're a former fund manager, a lifetime working with private capital. Okay. Why do we talk so only about government money all the time? Surely there must be private sector money that would be willing to back infrastructure projects where there's a revenue stream in terms of fares that's proven and almost certain to happen. Why can't we get more private finance involved here?
Well, it is happening. It's happening slowly but steadily. And initially, private investors wanted to back PFI projects where there were
private finance initiative, yeah,
where there was complete certainty about the revenues. Yeah. But gradually over time, investors have accepted more and more uncertainty, economic infrastructure, it's called, where there's a certain amount of risk, revenue risk, sort of maybe capital risk, and that's happening steadily. And I just don't think you can rush that progress. I think that could also happen in the railways, but the trouble is, now that we're back to the sort of bad old days of British Rail, I just wonder whether investors being asked to put money up for these projects will say, you know what, I don't want to rely on the fares that these routes are going to generate, because if British Rail goes back to the 1970s, maybe that's not an economic risk we want to take. But within reason, investors will take a certain degree of economic risk, or climate risk, for example, when it comes to renewable energy.
Mark, you're a proud free marketeer, but I'm sure you'd agree with me that infrastructure is important. The OECD, the Paris-based Western think tank, they often recommend that advanced economies should be spending at least 2.5% of GDP on infrastructure every year. We don't get anywhere near that in the UK most years, even with these big infrastructure projects we've had lately. HS2 kicking off, Crossrail across London, we spent 20 billion on that. How can we get more money into infrastructure so we can boost the productivity of this economy, get the growth moving, growth that's essential so we can deal with these massive post-pandemic debts?
It's a very good question, Liam, and I think that unfortunately over many years and successive governments, we've approached the problem in the wrong way. We've had government schemes dreamt up like HS2. When there's private money available to actually invest in transport infrastructure, the government's tended to block it or dilly-dally around. There was money on the table to radically improve both Heathrow Airport and Gatwick Airport and numerous other airports. Private money, by and large, totally private money in the case of Gatwick Airport. The government blocked that from going ahead. So I think if we took a more imaginative view, and I think your question about where is the private investment is the key one, Liam, because generally speaking, private investment will follow winners, not losers, projects that look like they're going to give a rate of return rather than a loss. And I think there is money willing to be invested in our transport infrastructure. That might well be air rather than rail, but if that's where we think the gains are, let's invest in air rather than rail. And it's very telling that very few people have come forward with their own money from their own pockets or their own investment funds with any interest at all in investing in HS2 or rail more generally, actually.
Well, Mark Littlewood, hold that thought, because our Yorkshire and Humber reporter Kevin Larkin, we heard from him earlier, he's still on the story, he's in Leeds, and he's now joined by Gerald Jennings, who's the director of the West and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce. Kevin, over to you.
Thank you, Liam. Yes, as you say, I'm with Gerald Jennings, who's the former chair of the West and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce. Gerald, I guess just to begin with, what's your immediate reaction to what we've heard from the government today?
Well, I think it's fair to say, Kevin, we're all a little bit disappointed and we're a little bit concerned about the announcements that we've heard today. Both me personally and in my role with the West and North Yorkshire Chamber, we've been lobbying for many years, too many for me to count now, for HS2, for East to West and connectivity, for that infrastructure investment. And to hear that we're not going to get the full package, yes, I think it's concerning and disappointing for the business community to hear that.
And is there any benefit, the Transport Secretary's been making a big play of the delivery will come sooner. So will there be an economic benefit from being able to get some projects delivered quicker and some improvements quicker?
Yeah, there is an element of truth in that, actually, but I think my concern would be that we're not kicking the can further down the road. We've had review after review, and it's great to hear that we're going to get some investment sooner perhaps than later, and that will help some of the projects, some of the investment that I know is waiting to come to West Yorkshire. But a lot of that is dependent on this infrastructure investment that we have been promised. And I think it's a concern to the business community as well that if we are going to have another review, there's a lack of certainty around that, and we all know business wants certainty. We want to know where we stand because that drives investment decisions.
And you're a businessman. The tone of the conversation, I just want to ask you this. If the government came to you, Grant Shapps, Rishi Sunak, Boris Johnson came to you, sat at you across a boardroom table with you and wanted to do a deal with you, sign a contract, would you be willing to take a handshake from them?
Yes, I think I would, actually. If I could see them across the table, eyeball to eyeball, and I would want to see in their eyes that what they're telling me at this stage is actually true and is going to be delivered, because we've lived on too many false promises for too long, and some of our places and some of our cities are suffering because of that lack of investment. And there's no better case in point than Bradford and Bradford City Centre, and we've been waiting decades for the investment we need in Bradford City Centre. And I know people would invest and would develop in that city if we had the transported infrastructure investment and the certainty around that.
And one of the big things I hear a lot, I'm sure you do as well, is why are we being made to choose? If we were London, we wouldn't be in that position. Is that a fair assessment in your mind?
Well, yes, I've been at meetings where that's been said, and we are being made to choose, and people have said to me, why don't we opt for East-West and lobby just for the East-West, the Northern Powerhouse rail, and forget HS2? But that's like saying, well, let's have the M62 without the M1. We would never have dreamt of doing that, and we've always made the point, and I've always made the point, that we need both. And yes, there is a disparity in investment per head between London and the South East and up in the north. But when I speak to people in London, to be fair, they also complain about the paucity of their transport infrastructure down there. So we've all got cases to make. The important point for me, though, is to think about this not as a cost, but as an investment. And it's not just an investment in Leeds or West Yorkshire and the north. It's an investment for the whole of the country. And it's not just for now or next year. It's for the next generation and the generation after. And we're going to miss a huge opportunity unless we continue to press the case and get government to commit to investment.
Excellent. Gerald Jennings, thank you very much for talking to us. Pleasure. Back to you in London, Liam.
The director of the West and North Yorkshire Chamber of Commerce. Brief final word from Mark Littlewood. Mark, if you had Boris Johnson in a lift, 10 seconds with him, levelling up, what's the one thing he should do?
Focus on roads and air, and as far as transport's concerned, much more than rail. Politicians are obsessed with rail because MPs use trains all the time. Most ordinary people don't. But if you really want to level up, it's not always about the government doing things. It's about the government getting out of the way. Can he cut business rates? Can he cut income tax? Can he cut regulation in these parts of the United Kingdom? I don't think that the North needs something done to it by Boris Johnson. They actually need the dead hand of the state to get out of the way to encourage the budding entrepreneurs in that part of the country.
OK, Mark, same questions to you, Max.
We almost stole my line. East Germany shows that all the government investment in the world doesn't actually result in levelling up. It's actually the private sector getting businesses to set up there, as perhaps Mrs Thatcher did with Nissan. That's what creates levelling up. And that the government can't do it by itself. It does need private sector investment.
Well, this subject, as ever, has really got you emailing in. Alex says levelling up is as much a lie as Northern Powerhouse Rail. It's just lies from a government that has no shame. Nigel says levelling up is dead. It was nothing more than a slogan. And Janice says, I'm a southerner and I feel very sorry for the North with all the broken promises. Why do these Conservatives think only London and the South matter? Wouldn't blame Northerners if they took back their votes. Thanks for all your emails. We love hearing from you here on The Money. You've been watching On The Money with me, Liam Halligan. Every weekday at 1 p.m, we bring you your daily dose of economic, business and consumer news. In-depth discussions with people who really know their stuff. Thanks for joining me today. See you tomorrow at 1 p.m. for a 2-hour On The Money special. This is GB News. I'm Liam Halligan and that was On The Money.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
Hi there. Much colder weather is likely later next week, but for the time being, it's very mild across the UK during the next few days with a lot of cloud cover and rain at times. A keen westerly airflow that's bringing in the cloud and some rain from the Atlantic. A lot of mild air as well, but the most persistent wet weather likely associated with these weather fronts close to the north of Scotland. So for Orkney, for parts of northern mainland Scotland, it is a damp afternoon to come. The rain easing a little later, drying up for the Western Isles. Otherwise, a lot of cloud across the UK. That cloud bringing in some spots of rain and drizzle over western hills of England and Wales, but some brighter interludes towards the east where it will be very mild. 13 to 14 Celsius generally, but 16 possible northeast England, eastern Scotland, even 17. Small chance of that in eastern Scotland. But it's a windy day as well for northern parts of the UK. That wind increasing over northern hills and especially the Northern Isles on Thursday night into the start of Friday. 60-mile-per-hour gusts for a time in the far north. Stays damp in the north of Scotland, stays cloudy generally elsewhere, and with that breeze, with the cloud, it is a very mild start to Friday with temperatures around 12 or even 13 Celsius in some of the warmer spots. So we start off with that cloud cover, but actually for many places it's looking a little brighter. So for the Midlands, for eastern England, eastern Scotland, a chance of some sunshine coming through, even for northwest England. But generally it's a similar sort of day with that keen gusty wind. The outbreaks of rain for northern Scotland, some light rain and drizzle for western hills and coasts as well, with that thick cloud always coming in on that westerly breeze from the Atlantic. Now, this weather front in the far north will eventually sink south over the weekend. That will introduce brighter skies from the north, but it will also turn the temperatures down a few degrees. So we're looking at those temperatures returning to average by Monday.
Canary Islands sponsors the weather.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Good afternoon. It's time to debate the big issues of the day with me, Gloria De Piero, Liam Halligan, and a whole host of experts.
Today we're asking, how do we get more white working class people into top jobs? Search us. It's because actor Eddie Marsan has called on universities to introduce quotas for white pupils from poor backgrounds. We'll be discussing that after the GB News headlines with Simon Pusey.
Thank you, guys. I'm Simon Pusey, and this is your news at 2 o'clock. The Prime Minister has said it's total rubbish to suggest that levelling up is being derailed by plans to scrap the eastern leg of the HS2 high-speed rail line. The government unveiled its £96 billion integrated rail plan this morning. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer has accused Boris Johnson of having let down everybody in the north with the scaled-back plans.
Bradford's been betrayed and the north of England have been betrayed because the Prime Minister made two very important promises. HS2 all the way to Leeds, a new line. That promise has been ripped up. He also promised the Northern Powerhouse rail, a new line from Manchester to Leeds, and that plan's been ripped up. This was the first test of levelling up, and the government has completely failed.
Sir Keir Starmer speaking a little earlier, but the Prime Minister says Leeds will be connected to HS2 in the future.
There are lots of people who say, well, look, what we should do is carve huge new railways through virgin territory, smashing through unspoilt countryside and villages, and do it all at once. Now, the problem with that is those extra high-speed lines take decades, and they don't deliver the commuter benefits that I'm talking about. We will eventually do them.
A public inquiry will be held following the death of Dawn Sturgis, who was unwittingly poisoned by Novichok in 2018. Home Secretary Priti Patel has granted permission to convert the inquest into a public inquiry to better examine any possible Russian involvement. Ms. Sturgis died after the substance was used in an attempt to poison the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal. A man who killed a university worker and seriously injured 7 others in a knife attack has been sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 21 years. Zephaniah McLeod will initially serve his sentence at a high-security hospital. He carried out a spate of knife attacks in Birmingham city centre in September of last year. The Women's Tennis Association has cast doubt on the veracity of a letter which has been attributed to a missing Chinese tennis player. Peng Shuai hasn't been seen since she accused a senior Chinese government official of sexual assault. Chinese state media have published a letter in which she purportedly says, "I'm not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home and everything is fine." Alec Baldwin is facing a second lawsuit over the fatal shooting on the film set Rust. Crew member Mamie Mitchell claims the script never called for a gun to be fired during the scene where cinematographer Helena Hutchins was shot and killed. She's called the incident